Hello and welcome to my presentation today on Hispanic immigrant integration into the American higher education system. I'm very passionate to talk to you, everybody, about this today. This topic hits very close to home, and it's a very important topic that isn't talked about enough. This is kind of like what we're going to be going over, a structure of the presentation today. And we're going to begin today with the background, inspiration, and significance of this research that I conducted. So where did I get my background and inspiration for this research I have done throughout the semester on the integration of Latino immigrants into the American education system? It kind of all just starts with my own story. In 2012, my family and I had the opportunity to immigrate into the United States. And that's kind of where my journey began of integrating myself into the educational system here. And not just the educational system, but also the customs and traditions of the United States and various different societal aspects as well. That really has inspired me to kind of dig in more into what this looks like here in the United States for other people other than myself. Recently, also, I watched this really incredible movie called The Long Game. I highly recommend you watch this film. It's very beautifully filmed, and it's about this group of the San Felipe High School golf team composed of mainly Latino youth in 1957 during a large increase in Latino immigration to the United States due to agriculture. And we see a lot of the racial and ethnic issues in the United States that have impacted the Latino community even through that time onto today. It's based on a true story. I highly recommend you watch it because it really highlights how the Latino immigrant community are part of kind of like this issue that's been happening with racism and this idea of like, you're not worthy enough for education, which is something we're going to be going over in this presentation. Also, if you look to the left here, we have some research from and data from Pew Research Center that kind of showcases the disparities of how many and what percentages of Latino immigrants have bachelor's degrees. And you can see like how as you go down this scale, it becomes very less and less, right? We see that there's a huge amount of people that do not have the opportunities to go to college and receive a bachelor's degree or even receive education after high school, or sometimes it's even less in many different cases. Another thing I want to talk about today is the limitations throughout the generations. Here, I kind of wanted to explain this a little bit, this perspective of my parents, for example, being here on the left-hand side. They didn't have the opportunity to come to the United States like I did with my sister in our teens and early and late childhood. They came to the United States to work. Therefore, they didn't have the opportunity to get an education here in the United States, right? Therefore, like the jobs that impacts the jobs and the social mobility that they have here in America versus my sister and I, right? We had the opportunities to come to the United States at a much younger age, therefore impacting our opportunities in education here. So you can see that like the age in which you integrate yourself or start to try to pursue an education really impacts that. And here to the right, we have my little cousin who was born here in the United States. And if you were to look at her, you know, she is very integrated into this American education system because she's grown up in it. It's her custom. It's her tradition. She didn't have to like go through that really difficult integration process of learning how it works. She was just able to do it. So this kind of leads me to my abstract that Latino immigrant students have a unique experience of integration into the United States as a whole. However, it is their pathway to achieving their educational goals that continues to be a challenge. I argue it is in the approaches we as citizens and the government use that need to be reframed so that more Latino immigrants like myself can have easier and more effective access to college. In this study, I analyzed the social structure needed to understand the Latino immigrant perspective, but also how the social structure must be perceived to fix these important issues. Language, family point of views, and governmental approaches proved to be key areas based on research from peer review articles and lived experiences that matter in this conversation. Latino immigrant students carry a drive of perseverance and ambitions that requires a society to foster and encourage. So here's my thesis. My thesis involves being a Hispanic immigrant, narrowing your opportunities to go to college and pursue a further education. Research suggests that with the proper governmental and socio-emotional support systems, Latino immigrants can expect a wider range of opportunities. However, it is the use of Hispanic framing of language, parental education of American college, and advocacy of government allyship with the Latino community that will further the progress of Hispanic migrant integration into the U.S. higher education. And some of these questions that I've listed down here are places that I've gathered inspiration from for my study. Like, what role does the government play in all of this? Or how can we make this education, higher education, more accessible to Latino students? What seems to be the issue? So let's jump straight into my analysis. My analysis was done in the macro perspective because I wanted to really analyze the social location of where Latino immigrants are at, right? We have to understand that it's society, institutions, small groups that make their way towards the individual and affect their social mobility in the United States. My point number one is the Latino immigrant has its own culture and language that speaks to this population. So first we jump into the concept of relabeling, where many sociologists went to this high school that was previously very underperforming, and the majority was Latino students in that high school called Urban College Academy. And here was something that I want to show is that what this school really tried to do was to change the language, change the way education was given to students, and try to, infuse in a way, quote unquote, this idea of college and pursuing a higher education after high school. So this kind of shows how, when you come to the United States, my family and I, we didn't really know how this system worked. So we somehow had to figure out how it worked. And that's kind of how what this school tried to do. The Urban College Academy tried to give people and change the norms and challenge the values that people came to the university, to the high school with. So in a way, this is kind of like a re-socialization by infusing college and making students excited. Like I said, this was done through field research where sociologists spent over 200 hours gathering data, almost like Professor Nin in Our Lady of Lavang studies. And one of the words that came up and up was ganas, which is desire, a strong word in Spanish that, is meant to encourage students. So my second point is that Latino immigrant families and parents challenge their perspectives of the American higher education system through a change of language. We see here that language, or quote unquote ganas, really had an impact on the students, right? Because the professors and the counselors would have conversations one-on-one with these students. It reminds me of a lot of the phrase ponte las pilas, which is very common in the Latino community, which means put on your batteries or keep going, don't give up. Another more tangible thing that the high school did was really influence its college resource center to really target our audience it wanted to impact. Counselors would talk to students about their own struggles and encourage ganas mentality, or you can do this. The resource center as well encouraged familialismo, which was teaching parents about what the implications of college was, how the system even works here in the United States, and we see how much this works. This also just shows like the impact that this has. Why this even came up in the first place for this high school, right? Parents would come saying that in other high schools, other students would say Latinos are useless, go to McDonald's. And this is an example of prejudice, right? Reminds us a lot of Tammy's story, right? And we see these student remarks of saying like, no, I can do college, right? I can integrate myself. There's no limits of what I can and cannot do based on the system over us. Which leads me to point number 3, is that there are different approaches to different Latino experiences, right? In this situation, right, we had a subordinate group, which is the Latino immigrant community, taking on a dominant group in educational ambitions, right? A system. And we see here that although there are some limits to the study, we still see that UCA performs very well compared to the national average. 85.5% of UCA students meet the A through G requirements versus the 25.5 nationwide for Latinos. So we see how this nurturing of Hispanic language into this high school has really impacted these students. But we couldn't really have this conversation if we also didn't talk about undocumented students, right? In this study, 36 undocumented immigrants were interviewed and heard for their perspectives because we don't really get much of that. And we see how there's so many of these undocumented immigrants that came to the United States young and, didn't have a choice in that. And we need to understand that there, even within the Latino immigrant community, there is a level of privilege, right? Some people have the opportunity to come in legally and some cannot. So not only do undocumented students have to deal with the prejudice and systemic barriers already in place, they also have many legal barriers. Like in this South Carolina House Bill of 4,400, which didn't allow undocumented students to go to college or another type of higher education. This study finds that when we talk to these students, these undocumented students, we find this idea of like how the school system feels anti-them, right? So in a way, they need to come out and they need to take a risk of coming out to a guidance counselor, developing the trust with someone and choosing someone that they can do that with. Therefore, highlighting the important student, school, and maybe even in this case, parental relationships that need to be built. Which leads me to point number 4. We must work opposite the social structure in order to see a difference in the never-changing systemic issues of the government, right? We use the macro perspective to analyze the individual, but we need to use the micro perspective, right? Work from the individual, see how we can influence the small groups, see how we can influence the institutions, and then the society and the government so that things change. This picture shows the metropolitan area of Oakland, and we see that in neighborhoods where we have predominantly Black and Hispanic students, we have less quality or more low-performing schools. And in neighborhoods where we have more white families, we see more green, more blue, a higher performance of schools, which just kind of shows something else that we already know of social stratification and how this impacts Latino immigrant students. I want to read this quote from Massey's categorically unequal text that says, the very last sentence says, the lack of equal access to higher quality education continues to be a major engine of stratification in the United States. Point number 5 leads me to, in order to understand the Latino immigrant struggle, we must understand the situation through the macro perspective. But to fix it, we must work through the micro perspective. Like I said before, we must work from the individual, understand what impacts the individual, then influence the families and the community and the school systems, then go up to the much more powerful institutions. So then we can really do something about the government's decisions. Also, we need to talk about socio-emotional support for students. Many studies have found how, social support moderates stress and anxiety among teenagers, specifically Latino immigrant students upon being studied, and also how beneficial parental support systems also encourage these partnerships among schools, families, and communities. Therefore, we see how we kind of are able to shift the social structure by becoming more allied with these different resources like schools and communities. And then we can build up to the institutions, which just keeps proving my point. These are some pictures of me with my family. I don't think I can credit my success if I didn't thank my family and be grateful for everything they have done for me. But also, I have had a lot of really important people that have just heard me where I'm at in places where I have been, or have offered opportunities to students that maybe are from minority group backgrounds, which is very important. So some final words of wisdom are that contemporary history are also the facts about success and failure of individual men and women. From the sociological imagination, we see that it's what we individually do to fix a problem that's going to make a gigantic difference. And we have learned all these little things we can do, like changing the language and changing the perspectives that we can use to help. And finally, Du Bois says, for the worlds I long for and all their dazzling opportunities were theirs, not mine. And this is how the Latino community feels right now. And we need to learn to fix that based on the research that we have found of reshifting the language we use, reshifting the methods that we try to apply to fix these large issues. So some final conclusions are the Hispanic language and culture of our approaches to integrating students into the educational system is very important. Working on the individual first, working up to the institutions and society confronts power firsthand. Every immigration story or status is different. Therefore, understanding different approaches to conversations is very important. We cannot fix systemic problems right away, so focusing on starting better parental, school, and community relations will get us one step closer to improving student outcomes. And finally, this helps us create these allyships that require one to advocate against power structures, starting with individuals and meeting them where they're at in their school communities and in their families. Also, I'd like to thank every single part of the references that I was able to gather. This research has been very helpful in my understanding of this subject. And I'd like to thank you for your time. Have a great day.